Now, it seems the odds are shortening in favour of Connolly Hospital in Blanchardstown as the site of the new National Children's Hospital. However, Health Minister James Riley will still have to make hard choices when he examines the long list of contenders, which include the Mater and St James's Hospital in city centre locations. The Irish Independent reports today that sources close to the selection process signalled that the Connolly site had forged ahead in the final shake-up. Well, joining us now is Fianna Fáil Councillor David McGuinness, who has been advocating his local hospital as the best site. Councillor David McGuinness, good morning.
Good morning, Pat. Thanks for having me.
Now, I was listening to an advocate for Temple Street this morning, the chair of the Medical Council in Temple Street, saying that it's got to be co-located with a maternity hospital and an adult teaching hospital, or else the whole thing won't work. So what do you say to that?
Well, I think it's interesting to note to date Connolly's own kind of engagement in this entire process. There was I recall you hosted a show where some advocates of other hospitals other than Connolly basically went head to head, and if I remember correctly, almost tore strips out of each other's proposals. And one thing I think Connolly did was to try and stay away from that type of thing, because it wasn't in anyone's interest. Remember, we're trying to develop, medical infrastructure here for the future of this country. So I wouldn't, I suppose, engage in that type of fist fight between hospitals. But ultimately, the body who will make a judgment on this is the Dolphin report, which, as far as I'm concerned, has been drafted, has been put before the Minister's desk. And I have been hearing similar things to yourselves, and that Connolly does seem to have forged ahead.
Now, don't forget that the Minister ultimately will make the decision, no matter what the Dolphin report recommends. If they give them a 1, a 2 and a 3, at the end of the day, the Minister will make his decision and have to rationalise it for the public. But let's talk about Blanchardstown for a moment. It wouldn't have all the services that many of the other hospitals have, but it does have one thing: it has lots of land.
True, and on that point, it's not only that the Minister will make a recommendation, it's ultimately the Cabinet that have to stand over it. It'll be, ultimately a political decision when it comes down to the Cabinet and how they obviously have to deliver this to the public. So I don't necessarily think it's only on the Minister, although he is key to this process. But yeah, in regard to the strengths of Connolly, they have more land available than any of the other proposals that I believe that are credible. I mean, if you think of some of the city centre sites, there's not that land availability. Where's the land available in Connolly? Well, next to the M50, in between the M2 and the M3, quite considerable land to develop further. And it's interesting the point you raised me earlier in relation to the maternity hospital. They're talking about a longer-term proposal that we may need a maternity hospital into the future. Well, Connolly can facilitate the children's hospital and the maternity hospital on the same land, and can also access land adjacent to it in Abbottstown, which is a national sports campus.
It's kind of interesting that we have 3 major maternity hospitals in the country. We have the Coombe, and we have Holles Street, and we have the Rotunda, all of them really a spit from each other. And all servicing the inner city, if you like. People, of course, come from far and wide. But, West Dublin, which is where a lot of the burgeoning population will live, is where most of the babies are going to be born.
Absolutely, and as part of my own submission, and like you say, I have been championing this cause for some time, I did highlight, obviously, census returns. See, census information came out this year that really hasn't been a part of this debate. And ultimately, if you look at the census figures, the bulk of the babies being born and the bulk of the growing population is in West Dublin. If you take, for example, that Connolly already serves South Meath, North Kildare, and also a stone's throw away from Louth and the inner city centre regions. Really, Connolly has become the focal point of medical needs for a huge portion. Around the 40% of the entire population of the country can be serviced very easily on the location in Connolly.
Now, there are issues, though. There are issues of access. Now, I know there's access from the M50, but I'm thinking of staff getting to Connolly. Many of the staff who work in Crumlin, for example, in the Children's Hospital there, they live in that particular catchment. There's no bus service, as far as I know, along the M50. The people who work in Temple Street, by and large, live in the east of the city and in the Phibsborough, that sort of area. I'm talking about nursing staff and other medical staff. Tala Hospital, again, not too far from Blanchardstown along the M50, but no bus service. So, that would be a huge dislocation for an awful lot of people.
Well, see, it's not accurate, I suppose, to say that there's no links. I mean, we do have an intercity rail link just a kilometre away from Connolly site at Castleknock train station. Also, there are bus links that go cross city. It's actually the ones that survived. The Dublin bus actually rationalised a lot of their service. They were going actually from the suburbs directly into the city centre. But there are services that survived from Tallaght across, I think it's the 76A. And also remember the Lewis BXD line stretches all the way out now, as proposed, out to Ashtown, which is again on Connolly's border. The point remains, though, I mean, public transportation, while we all try to promote it as much as possible, and I'm a huge advocate, particularly of train lines, of the Metro. Remember, Metro West could come again on live, could become live again as a result of this issue. But the reality is that more and more people are using their cars. It's a phenomenon, I suppose, that any amount of government intervention really hasn't been able to tackle. And the point about it is that if people are using their cars to get people to hospital, and equally if people want to bring sick people to hospital, namely children, they're going to get there as fast as possible along the roads. And the M50 upgrades, including the M3, the N2, are a road infrastructure, I suppose, the envy of any corner of this country.
But there would be medical disruptions. We know that the Mater site obviously is a teaching hospital, Temple Street closely associated with it, the Children's Hospital in Crumlin, great links with St. James University Hospital and Trinity College. So there would have to be an almost wholesale disruption of those relationships to set up the new campus at Blanchardstown.
No, Pat, actually, I think if you read the numerous reports that I suppose have been published to date, including, I suppose, what we have from Fingal County Council and Connolly themselves, Connolly is linked with Beaumont, and also it's also linked with the Royal College of Surgeons, and it would have been those three parties that would have made a joint submission that outlined their academic adult hospital status, and a lot of those relationships are actually growing and they have to come on true fruition. But the management there are not only offering that, they're also offering, an academic biomedical campus on additional lands, taking into consideration the Dunsink lands. So while other hospitals do have professional relations with other bodies, Connolly is a standalone unit of adult teaching hospital. They've been a teaching hospital for quite a number of years. Their infrastructure, I suppose, could be said to have been maybe older than some other hospitals. But that being said, to redevelop and to build a children's hospital on these lands will actually give them the new facilities. But they already have the academic adult hospital status, and that would have been the cornerstone of their submission to Dolphin. And that's why I'm not surprised that they're coming out on top in this review.
Something quite important is a greenfield site, wherever it is, and there were many sites proposed, as you know. A greenfield site is always going to be cheaper than a brownfield site or an infill site. Finally, you do want the Dolphin report on the runners and riders published because, I think at this stage, after all the rows, transparency would be absolutely vital.
Absolutely, but there has been some rumours locally that there might be favour for a greenfield site up the north of the county on a private developer's lands in and around Belcamp, and it was one of a number of submissions kind of generated from Fingal. So at this point in time, we're getting clear indications that Connolly has the strongest report from Dolphin, and what I think, in the interest of the public, publish this report. We've waited long enough for our children's hospital and allow the facts to speak for themselves, and allow some decency and transparency into our medical infrastructure into the future.
Fianna Fáil Councillor David McGuinness, thank you very much for joining us. Now, before I